Well, we come now to taking a look at the unexpectedly tough move, knight g4. That's in place of d5. White attacks the knight, black moves it. This is a very old-fashioned move, but still pretty good. I'm not sure I can find a way for white to get a definite advantage against it, although I can certainly pose black practical problems after this move. At first sight, it doesn't look like much. It seems like a question of time before white can prove that the knight on g4 is out of position. For instance, he may protect the pawn with queen e2, he may protect the pawn with bishop f4, and after that play h3. But black can intensify the pressure on the pawn at e5 with moves like queen to e7, and he can jab at the pawn on e5 with moves like d6 and maybe even f6. So it's not that easy. You've got to treat the move knight g4 with respect. Bishop takes f7 is a most disrespectful response to this move, and despite the fact that white looks as though he's getting some sort of an attack in this position, actually I think black has the advantage because it's easy to defend against the white threats, and then the knight and the queen are exposed. Who better to show us the way against knight g4 than the main Grandmaster exponent of this variation, Yevgeny Sveshnikov? In fact, I think if you want to investigate this variation further after you've finished viewing this video, I strongly suggest you look at all Sveshnikov's games when he uses this line. It's also a good trick actually because you let the Grandmaster do the preparation for you. This is not an especially fashionable variation, and so Sveshnikov games have kind of stood the test of time. This particular game, was played against Alexander Semenyuk, and it was played in Vladivostok in 1994. And here, white answered knight g4 with the solid move queen e2, and this move obliges black to continue attacking the pawn on e5 with queen e7, because I think white's threatening h3. I think that's a simple positional threat, pushing the knight to the edge of the board. And the point of queen e2 is, of course, that it prevents black from playing d6 or f6, freeing up his game. So black's got to play this uncomfortable move queen e7, and now Sveshnikov continued developing his pieces with bishop f4, renewing the threat of h3. And we reach now a critical moment where black has got to decide whether he wants to attack this pawn with d6 or f6. Both of the moves are reasonable, but black has to know exactly what he's doing when he plays them. Now if he plays d6 in this position, I think white should take this pawn and double the pawns. The point is that although white's a pawn down at the moment, black's got two very weak pawns in the centre, and the likelihood is if one of them goes, both could go. So black has got to be pretty careful as to the best way to organise his defensive setup here, or he could just end up a pawn down. I think knight bd2 is best, just continuing with development and threatening knight b3, and then bishop f5 is probably best for black. White goes on with knight b3, queen takes e2, king takes e2. Now Sveshnikov is one of those Grandmasters who set unorthodox problems for the opponent, and I think this variation is a variation exactly like that. This position is not orthodox for the open game. It looks very odd. You know, white's king's in the centre, black can maybe take on c2, but taking on c2 in this position is not that great because white recaptures and then he puts his rook on d1, and I like white's position here. You know, white's got a distinct developmental advantage. The black pieces are on weird squares. White's threatening a combination like bishop takes f7 check, followed by knight g5 check. He's also got knight b5 in the wings. This position could easily turn out extremely good for white. So just going back to bishop f5, knight b3, black can trade queens here, and then perhaps a more reliable move is to bring the knight back from the edge into the game with knight ge5. And then I think bishop b5. Well, white's getting ready to mop up those pawns, so probably black's better to take on f3 in this position, castle on the queen side. And now there are a couple of interesting moves here. For instance, white can already take on c6 and then take on d4. He's not much better here, but I think white does have a very small edge. although of course it's an unclear situation. If he doesn't like that, then going back to castles on the queen side, white can try rook he1, and if bishop takes c2, we have takes on c6. More awkward than it looks, because after b takes c6, knight takes d4, white's definitely got a big advantage in development. Black is hard pressed to repel, and if black interjects bishop takes b3, well, again, we can just take it and then take on a7, with again an obvious advantage for white, because his pieces are so active. So that variation should give you a flavour of the play after d6. In our featured game, Semenyuk played the other continuation here, f6, and he's trying to, when he plays this way, get the pawn out of the way on e5, and then hopefully he will have an extra central pawn which he can use to his advantage. Well, I think white's got to take that, and black recaptured with the knight. Now if he takes back with the g-pawn, I'll show you a couple of fragments from old Sveshnikov games. In the game Sveshnikov versus Agderstein, Biel into zonal 1993, white castled, Agderstein traded on e2, and then he played knight ge5. White shouldn't be in too much of a hurry to regain the pawn. He can get it back, just develop the pieces first. And now d5. That's the option which obviously f6 gives black, this extra central pawn. Okay, knight to b3. Agderstein gives back the pawn, and now bishop h5 check, with, I think, a slight advantage to white after bishop g3. Black hasn't solved all his problems in this position. He's still got a rather ragged pawn structure, although unusually for this variation, the ragged pawns are on the king side. Just dropping back to e takes f6, there's also the trade of queens here before taking on f6. And this was the game Sveshnikov versus Rodriguez, Manila, 1982. Another very old game. Well, white just got on with the job here of manoeuvring his knight around to b3. Black put his bishop in on e4. Again, you know, this move bishop takes c2 allows bishop e6 check, things like that. White took on d4 and had comfortably the better game here, with a clear advantage in development. Although this might not add up to too much, it's still something for a grandmaster, or indeed anybody, to work with. So, going back to e takes f6, black took on f6 in our featured game, and white just played knight bd2. If he takes on c7, I think he relinquishes the initiative after d6. Black's trapped that bishop. White's got to spend some time getting his bishop out of jail, and black uses that time to recuperate, and this shouldn't be too bad. The king feels quite safe on d7 when white hasn't got a light square bishop. So much better to play knight bd2. Black played d5. Another Sveshnikov game when queen takes e2 and then bishop c5. Then Sveshnikov gave the discovered check. He put his bishop on d3 and then played knight to b3. Again, with a typical type of slight advantage building up. It's easier for white to develop his pieces, and he's going to get the pawn back. So d5 was played in our game. Bishop b5, well, threatening knight takes d4. Black traded on e2. He played a6, and now Sveshnikov, perhaps slightly surprisingly, retreated his bishop back to d3, after which black played bishop g4. Takes on c6 is very forcing. Obviously white can get his pawn back this way, but I'm not sure. I mean, maybe black is okay after bishop g4. So in the game, bishop d3, bishop g4, bishop takes c7, rook to c8. Chekhov mentions that king d7 might have been better, and after bishop g3, rook e8 check, and then bishop d6. This way around, white's blocked in that rook, although black's still got weak double pawns in the centre. Rook c8 was answered by bishop g3, and bishop b4 was answered by h3. Black took, white recaptured, black castled, and now Sveshnikov played rook hd1. So as to give his king, as much as anything, a retreat square on f1. And this is what I mean about an unorthodox position, because white's still a pawn down. He's got two bishops, his king seems to be slightly more exposed than black's king, yet I'm going to argue that whatever advantage there is in this position lies with white. You'll see why in the game, as you know, by a whole series of strange looking moves, Sveshnikov managed to establish a really strong position. The point is he's got permanent advantages. Black can't really dissolve his double pawns, so white can just build up. H6 was answered by A3, and by building up, get a very good position at the same time. H5 was answered by King G1. Chekhov suggests King F7 is best here. But Bishop B6 was answered now by Knight H4. And suddenly white is starting to get on top. White is pressing. Black hasn't been able to manage his disadvantages. And suddenly after Bishop F6, white is coming in here with the crunching move, Knight D6. I don't know whether Semenyuk missed that, but, you know, his position's been awkward for, in a practical sense, quite some time. Rook takes D6, Bishop takes D6, Rook D8. Well, of course, Black's trying to go into some sort of endgame, the exchange down, where he's got a strong knight, outposts on C3. The double pawns might not be that weak, but Sveshnikov shows this is easy to circumnavigate. Bishop G3, Rook C1, and that was the end of the game. Black resigned. Summarising, it's not that easy to get an advantage against Knight G4. But I think the best way to try to go about doing this is to not only study the game of Sveshnikov, but to look at this idea of Queen E2 and then Bishop F4 very closely.